And as it flows, I am letting go. Just a smile enough. Your presence, finally I'm really done. Your presence I can live without.
Hey everybody, we are having some serious, we're having some serious ain't it just like the devil, right? Everything is working fine and perfect. The live stream I did the other night, and then now it's a hot mess. So we're just gonna get everything all switched over, made us all into bases. Yeah, it turned me into a mega base. So y'all let us know when it's 48 hertz. 48 hertz. Well, it's working. All right. We're bases right now. It changed the audio bit rate from 41K to 48K, but it's working and the noise is gone. So we're all gonna be bases on this one. All right, y'all. It's my supreme honor to introduce Dr. Grady McMurtry. For those of you that don't know, creation scientist. He has been teaching apologetics in this realm for, I think, longer than I have been, maybe longer than I've been alive. I don't know. We're going to find out. But I've got my brother Saunders here with me. And let's go ahead without further ado. I'm not going to belabor the point, but here is Dr. Grady McMurtry. Say what's up, y'all.
Hey, what's up, y'all?
I'm
very
obedient, man.
And I have no audio. Do you guys have audio?
Yeah.
Test 1, 2, 3.
Test 1, 2, 3.
You guys are coming through on the stream. I'm just hold up one
Well,
second.
there's one thing about live
TV.
There we go. Now I got you. It's a mess over
Now
here.
we're getting echo
We're getting
too.
echo too.
You're getting echo. How about now?
Best say I'm not.
I'm not.
Okay, good.
Oh,
I
actually,
think you
I am.
No,
What'd you do? Send it to me?
Send it to me.
if you guys will check your settings real quick at that same place, that three dots, and just make sure echo suppression is engaged. I don't know how in the world it's echoing with it not.
Hey, we can talk. Let's go for it.
Yeah. Let's see if that fixed it. Check. 1 2 1 2 1 2. This is kind of embarrassing, you know. The Lord loves to humble the pride. This guy who's a professional audio engineer does this every day. And now this is a mess. But it sounds like it's
Do
working.
I want noise suppression on?
No, you can leave that off. It's the echo suppression is the main thing. Oh man, they're saying the audio's bad. Sounds like it's okay on my end. But anyway, Dr. Grady, while I'm working on this, please give us just let us know how long you have been doing teaching apologetic creation science. For those that are unfamiliar with your whole journey through being raised on the atheist campus of is it Southern California you were teaching?
Oh no, Berkeley.
Berkeley, that's what it was. Berkeley, the Berkeley in California, not Berkeley in Boston, the music school. So
Correct.
give us kind of that a quick summary of your testimony, coming from atheism, from scientific, a materialistic, Darwinistic atheism, to being a missionary to the world, teaching creation. Give us just a short summary, and I'm going to work on this audio while you're doing so.
Okay. So you got 77 years to go, right?
Yeah.
No. Well, I hope everybody's sitting down. I was actually born in San Francisco, California. I was raised on the campus at Cal Berkeley, which is why I was a graduate evolutionist. I earned my science degrees as an evolutionist, and I taught evolution. I believed it. Of course, I was not exposed to any alternative, and so I simply accepted that evolution was true because it was the only thing that I was taught. And I would go on to earn my science degrees as an evolutionist. I taught it from the 7th grade through the university level. But at the age of 27, I did what any good scientist ought to do. A good scientist does not seek knowledge. A good scientist seeks truth. And so at the age of 27, in a search for truth, I was addressing the question, having been around Christianity all my life, never in it, but around it, because if you were born in 1946, as I was, and raised in the 40s, 50s, 60s, Christianity was much stronger in the United States in those days. And so, even a person like myself knew something about Jesus Christ, Mary, Joseph, those kind of things. But at the age of 27, I decided to decide for myself whether Jesus was telling the truth. Because if he wasn't, I was going to move on. It's very simple. There can only be one true religion. And so I checked Christianity first because it was the one I knew at least a little bit about. And so I simply looked at, was Jesus telling the truth? Was he the Son of God? Was he, co-creator with the Father and the Holy Spirit? And so I did a 6-month study to determine whether Jesus was telling the truth. Did he in fact even live, much less was he telling the truth? And after 6 months of studying history, both in the Bible and outside of the Bible, I became convinced that he was telling the truth. And of course, if you are a good scientist, and if you do seek truth and you find truth, then you have to accept it, whether you like it or not. And so people come to Christ in a spectrum. They come from almost entirely nothing but emotion, but a little intellect, to almost entirely intellect with very little emotion. And that was the end of the spectrum that I represent. That I came to faith in Christ almost entirely from an intellectual standpoint with a very small amount of emotion. Now, I got a lot more emotional about it later, but that's how I came. And of course, when I made that decision after 6 months, there was a lot of things I didn't know. And being a scientist, we kind of expect a checklist at the back of the book, and there isn't one. And so I made an appointment with a local church associate pastor, kind enough to accept my call, and we made an appointment. And I went over there and I explained to him what had happened to me in a bit longer way. And he looked at me and he said, "So your decision is firm?" And I looked back at him and said, "If you knew me," which he didn't. I said, "But if you knew me, you wouldn't even ask the question." And that kind of took him back. And he said, "Okay." And he opened up the Bible and he said, "Well, you need to make it public," and showed me scripture. And I said, "Okay, that's there." He said, "You need to be baptized in water," and showed me scripture. And I said, "Okay, it's there." And within a few weeks, I was baptized. But of course, that just made me a saved evolutionist. And the problem is, what do you do if you've been a teacher of evolution all your life and suddenly you have a personal relationship with the creator of the universe? I'm smart enough to know I had a problem. And so I spent 16 more months looking at science afresh. I did not allow what I had learned and taught others to influence me. I simply started with a blank piece of paper, looked at the science all over again. And of course, I looked at scientific law, natural process, physical evidence, which I was quite familiar with. I had grown up in the paleontology laboratories at Cal Berkeley. And at the end of 16 months, came to realize that there was absolutely no truth to evolution whatsoever. It is a fairy tale for adults. It is nothing but a religion that is deceptive and can only be maintained by lying. And so after the end of 16 months, I became a biblical scientific creationist, meaning someone who believes 100% from the Bible and 100% from science. That creation is true, occurred basically 6,000 years ago in 6 literal 24-hour days as we experience today. And of course, at that point, I had 2 choices. I could either get mad or I could get even. And so for the last 50 years, I've been getting even. I am now a creation science Christian apologist. I'm a full-time missionary, both to the United States and to 5 continents. And so I have ministered on all 5 continents that I can. If you can get me an invitation to go to Antarctica, I'll be quite willing to go. But of course, with the conflicts in the world in the last few years, I've been restricted from doing some of the work that I used to do quite readily. I used to go to Russia 2-3 times a year, went 59 times altogether, but can't do that at the moment. Same thing with Ukraine. Same thing with Armenia. So I've also been going to, for instance, Brazil for the last 20 years on a regular basis. But I also go to many countries around the world. And I'm not going to sit here and list them. I mean, there's 25 of them. But I will continue to be going, for instance, this year, this summer here, winter there. I'm going to be going to Paraguay, Uruguay, Bolivia, Brazil. And when we can, I'm going to continue to go back to Israel, but also other countries as well.
Beautiful. We already have our first dissenter, so but we will get to that. Brother Brailsford is saying that basically the idea of creation in a week is hogwash, but we're gonna get there. Rod,
that would be very unkosher.
That would be, yeah. We probably hopefully already have some Messianics in here, so they would they love the pig jokes. Brother
Yeah.
Rod is go ahead, Dr.
No, I was
Grady.
going
Don't
to
cut
say,
you off.
my book on the Feast of the Old Testament that I wrote, because I grew up in the Jewish community. I was never a Jew, but I grew up in the Jewish community from the age of 8. Wrote a book on the Feast of the Old Testament, which is today the textbook for the Messianic Union in Russia when they teach on the feasts. So I'm very happy to have Messianics if they want to come on in.
Oh yeah. Now I have a close relationship with a lot of the Hebrew roots community, so it's incredible perspective. But I didn't give with all those audio issues. I didn't say. I mean, I don't need to introduce Rob because a lot of folks here. Yes, my mic is much deeper because I had some audio issues in the beginning. So everybody else sounds normal, and I sound like Barry White. Can't get enough of creation, babe. I don't know why. That probably sounds hilarious on the playback. Thank you, Patrick, for sharing this with 14 people. Beautiful. Come on, y'all. We're going to get 100 folks in here tonight. We had 50 last week talking about something not as important as this issue, but Rod and I have discussed this at length, and that was actually the fun thing. I brought up your name, and he said, I actually reached out to him to interview him and then didn't follow up. So, I mean, I was like a dog with the bone. I was like, I said, I'll jump all over that. So he finished your book, and I'm gonna give Rod the first actual question of the evening. So there it is.
Oh, that's a very old copy, Rod. We got to get you a new one. That's been expanded and updated long ago. I mean, you're reading ancient history there.
Okay, this was 2008. The 2008.
Yes, well, the book looks much better now, and the cover actually has a picture of Yosemite Valley because that's kind of where I grew up.
Okay.
And simply because you have that coffee cup or whatever it is that you've got there, I am not with the Creation Museum. I am with.
Oh no,
Creation
I know
Worldview
you're not
Ministries.
affiliated. No,
No,
I know.
For the audience's purposes.
Gotcha.
The ministry that I'm the president of is Creation Worldview Ministries in Orlando.
Yep. We need. Well, get me a
just tell
dinosaur
a
mug,
little
and
bit.
I will.
Have to think about that.
I'll just tell
Go
a
for it,
little bit
Rod.
of my story here, if I could.
Yeah,
Okay. And do I sound like Barry White?
You sound perfect.
Because
I'm
if
the
I
only one that
do,
sounds
I sound
extra bassy.
okay. Because I can raise the pitch of my voice if I need to. Um, I was going to Calvary Assembly in Winter Park, Florida, which is in the Orlando area back in 1988 through 1990. And I got into a discussion with a couple of ladies there about distant starlight. And I was at the time an old Earth creationist, and I explained to them why, and because of the distant starlight problem. And they said, "Well, Grady McMurtry explains that." And I said, "Who's Grady McMurtry?" And oh, he goes to church here. He does these little seminars every once in a while. You should check out his seminars. And I kept hearing them talk about Grady McMurtry. And I didn't ever make it to one of his seminars, but I remember them talking about him. And then years later, when YouTube came along, I watched some of his videos. He's been at this a long time. I mean, the intelligent design movement started, I guess, in the late 80s. So I'm guessing that you were teaching this before the ID movement began. Is that right?
well, yes, and if I may point out, creation scientists are not part of the IDM. They're quite separate, and most of them are theistic evolutionists. So they IDM movement is for the most part an old Earth, old creation, old universe view.
Okay.
They have great arguments biologically that evolution is not
Hmm.
true, and I'm not against them disseminating that information at all. But they are not us. They, for the most, as a matter of fact, one of the books, "The Icons of Evolution," was written by a guy who, at the time, at least, was a Buddhist.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So the creation scientists like myself, we are young Earth. We are interested in getting people saved, certainly.
Hmm.
The IDM is the intelligent design movement, as you say. They are, again, arguing very effectively that evolution is not true scientifically, and that's great. Again, I wouldn't spend a nickel against them. But they are not young Earth. They are not supporting biblical inerrancy, and we do. So there is a
Okay.
difference that I think is worth noting. Now, as to your question, yes, I was starting to teach on creation science, as I mentioned, 50 years ago. So this is my
Mm.
this is my 50th year now.
Wow. So you were kind of a pioneer, I guess. Nobody else was doing this when you started?
Oh no, I mean the real founders of the modern creation science movement would have to go to Dr. Henry Morris, Dr. Dwayne Gish. And in the very late 60s, basically mid to late 60s, they were already doing these things. And there were biblical scientific creationists that came
Okay.
before. However, um, it was a relatively small movement at the time, but we did come before the IDM got going, yes. And so they came along about
Okay.
10 years after I did, and maybe 15 to 20 years after they did. So,
Okay. All right. Well, I'm kind of Gabriel and I have talked about this before. I'm kind of a hybrid young Earth, old Earth. I'm just kind of in the I don't know camp because maybe we don't understand enough about time dilation and things like that. So, if you want to start off, can you explain to me uh, why the time dilation issue might affect our perception of the age of the universe?
well, first of all, the time dilation part only has to do with the subject of basically of starlight and time. Um, that is, as an issue, isn't the same thing as what we're talking about when it comes to young Earth creationism and biblical inerrancies. But that's one way in which people can try to say, well, why do we see distant objects? And I would point out
Mm,
to you that, of course, again, on our website at creationworldview.org, we have a lot of articles. And we have articles on redshift, we have articles on that kind of issue. Um, but there are, for instance, are at least 7 scientific arguments on how you could get redshift without expansion. Um, There are creation scientists, and you're talking about, for instance, Russell Humphreys and others, that uh,
Hmm.
white holes, time dilation, and so forth. But there are ways in which we can see what we see and still be only 6,000 years old. Um,
Okay.
People have been convinced by evolutionists, basically, teaching in public schools and universities, that the speed of light is a constant, but it's not. There are constants in science, such as G for gravity, alpha for the fine particle constant. But there are actually very few true constants. And the speed of light is not one, but it's taught by evolutionists because it suits their purpose. Think with me for a moment, Rod. If the speed of light were a true constant, which it is not, but if it were, and we see an object that is 50 million light years away, then you would have an argument that it was 50 million years of time that passed by.
Right.
However, for instance, Einstein said you can only measure light in one direction. That in
Hmm.
fact, what we may be seeing is in fact instantaneously happening. That it doesn't take 50 million years for the light to get here. But when it bounces back out, it may be traveling at 186, thousand miles per second. Um, but we have been able to measure the speed of light accurately for 350 years. Most people don't realize that. And we have the data set to prove that it's slowing down over time. And if you think about it, and you use the laws of thermodynamics in the second law. The second law of thermodynamics applies to all systems, period. There isn't one
Including
thing
light,
exactly. So
I
my
guess.
question to start off that would be, uh, since the second law applies to all systems, all entities, etc., why should light be exempt?
Hmm.
I think that's a good question. Now, we've been able to measure it slow down for 350 years. Um, I know of, for instance, one radio astronomer in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, where it's kind of the center of my work in Russia, my hub. And he's not a young Earth creationist like we would be, say, um, but on very good data, he says at one time in the past, the speed of light may have been 10 million times faster than today. Well, that would
Mm.
make the universe quite young, actually. Another way of looking at it is, you look like you're in a pretty decent place behind you. I have never seen your place before. Um, got a swimming pool, or at least you use one, or you've been in one at some time in your
This
life?
is this is fake.
Using that old AI.
He didn't even have to say that, folks. but but Rod, you've been in
Oh,
a
it's
swimming
all
pool.
real. I own the building. It's
Okay, but you've been in a swimming pool, correct? And so you know that the speed of light in water is slower than the speed of light in air, correct?
hmm
And so that means the speed of light is dependent upon the medium through which it passes, correct? Now,
right.
we know categorically. Einstein theorized that gravity would bend light. At the time he said it, he couldn't prove it, but we now know absolutely categorically that gravity does bend light. There's no question about it. We use it as a research tool, gravitational lensing. It allows us to see galaxies behind galaxies we can't see through.
Hmm.
And because of that, therefore, gravity does affect the speed of light. Now, knowing that,
That's interesting.
think about it for a second. Um, there is no place that gravity does not exist. Nowhere. It is a universal force in nature. Now, the strength of it depends upon mass and distance, but there is not a. I mean, scientists like myself, we tell jokes about zero gravity because any good scientist would know there's no such thing as zero gravity. But between galaxies, well, you have microgravity, correct? But even if you were standing or could stand between two galaxies, one galaxy would be pulling you a little bit more towards it than the other. But it's microgravity, right? But as you enter into a galaxy, the gravitational field becomes thicker. You get into a solar system, the gravity becomes thicker. So the speed of light is dependent upon the medium through which it passes. Therefore, passing between galaxies, it might travel in incredibly high speeds. As it gets into a galaxy, because the gravity is getting thicker, it would slow down. And it gets in the solar system, it slows down even more. Remember that we talk about the speed of light as measured here on Earth on the surface, but we've never been outside our solar system. We've never measured it anyplace else. You cannot remotely measure the speed of light. And so there's no reason to believe that, or not to believe that in fact light was traveling, again, maybe 10 million times faster, maybe instantaneously, in a very low gravity state throughout the universe. One of the big problems for the evolutionists, of course, is the horizon problem. That if the universe were as old as they say it is, then light should have gone throughout the entire universe, and you should have had an equal transfer of heat, and the universe ought to be basically the same temperature, but it's not. There's hot spots, there's cold spots, and that proves that the universe is young. So there's a lot of things that are involved with this speed of light issue, and we now know that redshift is quantized, meaning that redshift is not a smooth curve. If redshift promoted the evolutionary position of the more redshifted things were, the older they were, it should be a smooth curve. It would be a curvilinear smooth curve.
Okay.
But in fact, what we find is that it is in concentric shells with repeating distances. Now that requires an intelligence to start with. It could not be by random chance. And again, it proves that the entire thing is young. And I haven't even started talking about geochronometers yet, except for the speed of light one.
If I could just
so much science
interject,
to support a young universe.
There are probably people out there that don't know what redshift is. Redshift is like a Doppler effect, only for light.
Yeah,
as it's
just as it is for sound. And
ambulance goes by.
Yeah, or we used to teach
it's blue as it's coming toward you, and it's red as it's moving away.
And redder if it's accelerating. Yeah.
Right.
And we did find a few blue
that's
objects in the universe, but not many.
Okay. So, and this is how they determined, apparently, that the universe is expanding, is that they saw the red shift with a high-power telescope out in California 100 years ago. And
but again,
they said, well, the universe is expanding.
Yeah, but again, that was a thought based on what they were seeing in a very early stage of being able to measure such things. So give them credit, right? But as I mentioned, there's many ways in which you can get redshift without expansion. And of course, there are some evolutionists who say it's not the Big Bang, but Big Crunch. And then there's the guys who say, oh, no, it's oscillating back and forth, in and out like an accordion. You'll find these guys who have various different opinions, and they fight each other. But redshift is quantized, which means it's like concentric shells. And that actually supports the statement of the Bible that says that the earth is at the center of the universe. And so now we can scientifically prove that we are not simply a random speck in an infinite universe, that in fact there is a center. And we are in the center of the universe, not the dead center, because if we were in the dead center, we'd be dead. We are not at the center of our galaxy, because if we were there, the gravitational forces and the radiation would kill us. But it proves that the galaxy that we are in is at the center of the universe, that we are special. And that destroys the evolutionary philosophy that we're just a random event.
So no matter which direction you look in, it appears that the galaxies and stars are moving away from us, which wouldn't be
necessarily
the case otherwise.
I think there's something you missed when I said you can get redshift without expansion.
Yeah, what I'm talking about is that this is what they're basing that on.
They started with that, and that supposedly, of course, supported the Big Bang concept. And then they try to say, well, the Bible supports a Big Bang, and no, it doesn't. The scriptures that they use, they of course distort. Actually, when it says that God stretched out the heavens, is not a Big Bang. The word in Hebrew there means to, for instance, if I took my hand next to my chest and I constant speed to the end where my arm stops, that's the word stretched out. It's an equal over space. It's not a
like smoothing out
a big. Well, it's not a big force in the beginning like a bang and then diminishing over time. it's equal, uniform. And so it does not support a Big Bang, just in case somebody might think it does. But you can get redshift, for example. I'm not sure where you're at, I'm sorry. But certainly at some point in your life, you've been in a place that had a radiant heater, correct? You know, an
Sure.
electric radiant heater where the red coils transfer, infrared light, it hits you and it warms you, but the air is still cold, right?
Right.
Right? I can't, for some reason, there's a time delay on Rod's mic, and I know he says something, and I'll hear it later. But think with me, as light goes across the universe, it is eventually going to hit something. Space is not a true vacuum. I mean, people talk about it like it's a true vacuum. It's not. There's dust and gas particles and so forth throughout the area. And eventually light is going to hit something. I mean, I don't care how far it has to travel, it's going to hit something. And what happens, let's say it's a dust particle. Well, the light is absorbed, but of course, when the light's absorbed, that heats the particle. And that means that when the light is re-emitted from the particle, it's going to be from a warmer object. And therefore, it's going to be a redder light. And so you can get redshift simply because of the warming of particles and gas molecules as light travels through the universe. There are other ways too. For instance, there's what's called lazy light. Think with me, it is illogical to believe that light can travel at 186,000 miles per second or more without using some energy. Would you agree? And so what's going to happen if it's emitted at, let's say, a frequency of, 100,000 hertz, and it's traveling through space, it's going to have to use some energy somewhere along the line. So what's going to happen? Well, then the cycles are going to start slowing down. So instead of 100,000 hertz, it's going to slow down to, say, 70,000 hertz. Well, in doing so, that elongates the wavelength and causes the light to appear redder, even though it's not from expansion. And so there are ways to get redshift without actual physical expansion.
Okay. I guess I need to go. Well, I need to get an updated book or go to your website and dive into this a little bit more. What's the name of your website again?
Creation Worldview, VIEW, not worldwide, but Creation Worldview.org.
Okay.
And I actually have an article there on redshift. All you have to do is, if you go to the article page, I've got over 100 articles there that are for free. Anybody can read them. You can email them. You can print them. But if you simply look at the little search engine and type in redshift, it'll take you right to an article that explains many ways in which you can get redshift without expansion. And even secular scientists still argue amongst themselves, although the consensus might be that it's expanding. There's many that say, no, it's actually, again, crunch coming in versus going out. And then, of course, there's the steady state that it's doing neither. But there's many ways. I explain very simply. I mean, my articles are all at the layman's level. There's nothing there that's technical except one little section of articles, and they are clearly marked as being technical. But everything else is,
okay.
Yep.
I was brave enough to poke my head in there one day, and I left 10 minutes later.
Careful. Now, I noticed you just brought that up. Thank you. But nonetheless, you can get redshift without expansion. It's not a smooth curve. This destroys the evolutionary view. It is quantized in shells, like concentric shells. And it also repeats at distances, which requires intelligence. It could not possibly be by random chance.
Right. Well, my position has been for years that the Bible is true and what we observe is also true, and that there's just something that we're missing that can reconcile the two. And it sounds like that's what you've provided on your website that I need to go and read.
There's nothing that we observe that's contradictory with the statements in the Bible. It's only if you come from that general evolutionary background, again, like teaching you that the speed of light's a constant when it's not. And by the way, I have in there research, anybody can look up, I give the citations, but we have slowed light down in laboratory. We have even, and I say we, actually it was evolutionists, not creationists. But there is a group of evolutionary physicists and astrophysicists who have actually claimed to have slowed light down, and twice they say they have stopped it and started it again. Now, I disagree with that. I mean, I'm only quoting what they say. I know what they wrote. I know why they wrote it. And I would not say they actually stopped light and started it again, but they claim it. But we have slowed light down, like 30 miles an hour. You can see it go down the street like a car. And I would also point out, to prove my statement, that light is not a constant speed, is if you can manipulate it, it's not a constant.
Mm-hmm.
And so the experiments done by secular, evolutionary believing scientists of various ilks have actually proven that light is not a true constant. It does speed up, slow down, so forth. And one experiment, they actually speeded it up, which is quite interesting because, of course, Einstein said you couldn't, but we have. Yeah, and people are going to disagree with that statement, but I'll give the citations. Argue with the people who did the research. Don't argue with
Yeah.
me.
What's the name of the Australian physicist who's the one that made that discovery? Because I learned that from Chuck Missler 15 years ago, and it's funny that I've actually had to debate with people that I just told them, just do a quick Google search and you'll see that it's about 20 years old, that's not a constant, yet it's still taught in schools and colleges today that it's a constant. And I
Well,
can't remember.
In our lives here on Earth and inside the solar system, effectively it's a constant. And yet, when you take a look at the Pioneer anomaly, you start to see that, well, maybe the farther we go, we are starting to see the effect of the change of the speed of light. The Pioneer anomaly has been throwing evolution as a curve for a few years now. Mm-hmm. But as I say, we have never been out of our solar system. We haven't even gotten close to being outside of our, quote, sphere of influence. We certainly got out of the edge, but we haven't gotten beyond the effect of the solar system. And so we really haven't had a chance to test it correctly. But it appears that this may be what's the case.
Yeah. I'm going to ask the chat if they want to weigh in. Michael Belsford is he's the son of a gentleman I actually met on tour several years ago. He actually stated he's gone from Christianity to atheism. So he's burning up chat with all sorts of questions. But I want to ask the general chat if you guys do we want to go into evolution or do we want to go into creationism or young earth creationism? So y'all let us know in the comments. I actually wanted to hit you up while we're doing it. I'll kind of just start to take out of the cosmos because I know for a lot of people,
it's ethereal.
Yeah. I struggle. But I've never been. I look at the stars and I say, "Wow, that's interesting." But I'd rather look at reptiles, herpetology, zoology, biology, the cell. That's I look at the star and it's so far beyond me. Wow. That's about as far as I go with it.
That's what God says. Yes.
Yeah, pretty much. You talk about, and this is actually something I've been wanting to ask you for a while. The 5 false assumptions that are made with radiometric dating, because I know your personal best proof for a young Earth is the radioactive field around the Earth. I think the second one would be
the gravitational field.
There you go, gravitational field. Sorry, musician,
there
not
are
a
six
scientist.
flaws. There are six. Yeah, there's 6 flaws in every radiometric dating process, and carbon-14 has 20. But my favorite argument for a young Earth is the decay of the magnetic field, and so don't confuse magnetism with radioactive. So, but yeah, we've been able to measure the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. It follows a half-life just like the decay of a radioactive material. But we've been able to measure it for 200 years, which in modern science is actually quite a long data set. There's not a lot of things that we have true data sets for. Most of them are 50 years, 100 years, but that's 200. And it has a half-life of 1,400 years. And so what happens is that you back up every 1,400 years, you double every 1,400 years. And when you get to 6,000 years old, it's still acceptable. But when you get to 10,000 years old, it would kill us. there's absolutely no way the Earth could be beyond 8,000. I would argue less than 8, but at some point right in that area, it becomes lethal. And therefore, we could not have been evolving. We could not have been existing on this Earth for more than 6,000 years. And if you really want to take it a little further, I might be willing to go with you. But at 10,000 years, it simply obliterates us, pure and simple. I mean, think about the super magnets that are used at CERN. You cannot allow a human being to be in the tunnel at CERN when they turn those magnets on. It would rip them apart.
Mm.
And so evolutionists know that the Earth's magnetic field is in fact decaying. Every good scientist would know that, regardless. Of course, some of them want to argue that, well, yes, but we just live at a time when we are now able to measure it, and that we happen to be catching it as it's going downhill. But the problem is, they'll say, well, it's going to decay completely, and then it regenerates and rebuilds itself, and this is a cycle that goes on infinitum. That's impossible. First of all, God had to put the magnetic field where it is in order to protect us from deadly radiation. And so you have a double-edged sword. If the field shrinks to zero, that would kill us, because we'd be exposed to all that, mostly solar radiation, but even galactic radiation. And if you go back more than, as I say, about 8,000 years, at 10,000, it'd be so strong it would kill us. And so we live in a very short window of time. It's impossible for the Earth and the universe to be old. And this is in the areas of the science of geochronometers, Earth time clocks or universe time clocks. It's the field that I love. And today we have over 400 scientific testing things that we can do when it comes to geochronometers that shows that the Earth and the solar system, the galaxy, the universe are all young. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at barred spiral galaxies or the decay of the Earth's magnetic field, lumpy rings around planets, too much heat inside the Earth, too much heat inside the moon, the sun rotates too fast. And I'm just giving you some minor ones. If you go to my website at creationworldview.org and you go to the button that says free videos, now we have a bookstore for videos that are being sold, but if you go to our free videos, and now there's a few interviews and a service, church service, but there's a section that says, did you know? And you being a capital U to save space. Did you know? And today we have over 400 short videos there. Now, these 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute. And over half of them deal with some argument, some factoid, proving that the whole thing is young. So if you simply go there, and by the way, I would point out, Gabriel, that if you've got insomnia, it's a great place to go too. Because they play continuously. And so once you start, after about 10, 15, you're out. Yeah.
Right out.
Yeah,
Right out. Murillo had a comment on a question on this on this topic. He heard that dating fossils using carbon-14 is flawed because their isotopes can date up to 12,000 years. But I don't know if he meant 120,000 years due to the decay of carbon-14.
Yeah, I can correct that. That's not a problem. Yeah, carbon-14 is the worst of all the radiometric dating processes because it has 20 scientific flaws. Now, we have an article, we have a video, we have a book available on the website on how they're all flawed. But carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years, which means that every 5,730 years, if you go back in time, the idea being the older it is, you would have less and less carbon-14 in the deposit. Now, first of all, if anybody tells you that they've dated dinosaur bones using carbon-14, you should look them right in the face and laugh hysterically. Just laugh hysterically. Because according to evolutionists, dinosaurs haven't existed for 65 million supposed years. But carbon-14 decays so fast, and I use that a little tongue-in-cheek, that we can only measure it back 17 and a half half-lives, which means basically 103,000 years. So if a sample were more than 103,000 years, we should find no carbon-14 in it. The problem is we can't find a carbonaceous deposit on Earth that doesn't have significant measurable carbon-14. So it doesn't matter whether you're looking at coal, oil, natural gas, carbonaceous clays. We find significant carbon-14 in all of it. And of course, this also proves that the Earth is young and the evolutionary time is not true. So carbon-14, when you get right down to it, the only thing it's good for is proving the Earth is young. It's absolutely
Got it.
useless. I mean, in my video, for instance, I show some really neat examples of carbon-14 showing why it doesn't work and that it doesn't work. We found two mammoths frozen next to each other in Alaska, and we carbon-14 dated them, and they had died thousands of years apart, yet they were buried together. We found a single one, and the carbon-14 dated the skin and the flesh, and found out that the skin and the flesh had died thousands of years apart. And I don't know about you, but I think that's a problem.
Yeah, just a little bit.
But there's many others. But the same thing is true of rubidium, strontium, and potassium, argon, and all of them start with 6 fatal flaws. But I think the first fatal flaw, the one that's most obvious that anybody listening here would see immediately, is we today, with technical equipment, can measure the isotopes in a sample very accurately. However, we do not know the starting conditions. If you do not know the starting conditions, if you only know the ending conditions, then if you are saying you can use it to get a date, it's only because of the assumptions you choose to force on it. And I could easily demonstrate how, say that you're looking at uranium lead, how for a variety of reasons, uranium lead doesn't work at all. So again, if you don't know the starting conditions, you only know the ending ones, you have an invalid date to start with. And it's all based on assumptions with your religion.
Yeah, I like the way Dr. Kent Hovind puts it. He says, you see a candle in a room lit. When was it lit? You just see a candle burning, and when was it lit?
See, that's just it. There's 6 reasons why they don't work that are of that nature. But I'm talking about 6 fatal flaws in the technical sense.
Okay, that's even more so.
Yeah. But what you're talking about is how do you know how long the clock's been ticking? If it's running when you enter the room, how do you know when it started? It could have been started 1 minute before you entered the room, 1,000,000 supposed years before you entered the room. And the next one is, of course, what was the reading on it when it started? Because if you don't know what the reading was on it when it started, you don't know how long it's been ticking. You just know it's ticking when you got in the room. I mean, yes, that's easy to illustrate. But I'm talking about the technical reasons that carbon-14 doesn't work.
Gotcha. This is actually, I'm going to throw up Michael's a fire hose over here, brother. If I had a slow down feature, if I could dilate time over your chat, I would do it. I don't even know you, but I love your dad. But bro, you're wearing me out. So I'm gonna throw him a bone just to get him to slow down, because I think this is interesting because of both of your testimonies, being that Rod was a creation evolutionist or a scientific evolutionist Christian, and
Theistic evolutionist.
theistic
Theistic evolutionist, yes, of one sort or another. There's different kinds.
Dr. Grady, when you came to faith, you immediately had to reconcile that issue. So that is his, not his, sorry, there you go. So why do you reject the notion that faith is discredited by the theory of evolution? Or is that even your position, which I don't think it is, but if that's the case, go ahead.
Well, first of all, let me stipulate. What you believe about the age of the earth is not the salvation issue. If you want to believe in an old universe, you can still go to heaven. I stipulate that up front. Everybody heard me, right? However, if you do that, you have a very weak faith. You are ignorant. And I say that because ignorance is not a dirty word. It just means without knowledge. You are ignorant of a great deal of science that disproves the old earth, old universe view. And that's solvable. I mean, we can show you all kinds of science to prove that it's young. Now, why is this important, though, to the gospel? Now, it's not the salvation issue. I hope you heard me say that. Salvation issue is your relationship with the Father through the Son, right? However, if you believe in an old earth, old universe, you're denying the power of the cross, whether you realize it or not. Because think with me, Paul is, for instance, the Apostle Paul is quite specific about this. Romans 5:12. It is through the sin of the first man, Adam, that death came into the universe. Now, you must understand what that death means. It's not talking about physical death, it's talking about spiritual death. But it is also talking about the death of a nephesh organism. Now, when you go to the creation week in Genesis, and for instance, many people don't understand how God wrote the Bible, but there's not two creations, there's only one. And what God does is he gives us the quick outline from Genesis 1:1 to down to about chapter 2, verse 3, 4. And then what he does is give us the details of what occurred during the 7 days. Now, when you take a look at 2:7, and God breathes the breath of life into the man, it is the Hebrew word nephesh. Nephesh. Now, in Hebrew, that word is used for soul, life, blood. As I'm sure you'll remember, the Bible says that the life is in the blood, correct? But soul, life, blood. Now, what is the soul? The soul is the intellect, the emotion, and the will. It's what you think, what you feel, and how you tell your body to move around. Now, animals such as cats and dogs, dinosaurs, have a soul, and that is quite specific in the scripture. And you can go to Ecclesiastes to prove it. But we are not animals. As humans, we're not animals. We have a biological body like animals. We have a body, we have a soul, we have intellect, emotion, will. But we also have a spirit. That's what makes us different than animals. But plants don't have soul. They don't have nephesh. Insects don't have nephesh. Only the smallest but higher animals, I mean, everything from a shrew to a titanosaur, has a soul. They have intellect, emotion, and will. And what Paul wrote was that no organism that had a soul died prior to the first sin of Adam. That is, it was the first sin of Adam that caused the entire perfect universe to become imperfect. Now, if you believe in an old earth, old universe, whether you believe that there were people or not, again, there's different views here. But if you believe that there were creatures with souls that were living and dying prior to the sin of Adam, then what you're saying is that the sin of Adam is not the cause of death coming into the universe. And if that's true, then the death of Christ on the cross is meaningless. And this is a very, very important point. And so if creatures with nephesh are living and dying prior to Adam's sin, then Adam's sin is not what caused the death of creatures with a soul to occur. If the sin of the first Adam didn't cause death to come into the universe, the death of the second Adam cannot take it away. And this is extraordinarily important theologically. So again, I stipulate a person can believe it and go to heaven. I wouldn't want to trade places with you. I wouldn't have to try to justify my position to the Father when I have to justify what I did in life. But it won't prevent you from being saved. I would suggest it would certainly diminish reward. How do you justify the Father? Well, yeah, I'm willing to believe Christ died for my sins, but I'm not willing to believe creation as you wrote it. And that's really what we're talking about here. People who say that, the earth and the universe are old are simply saying you can pick and choose. And I would point out, philosophically, you can't. You have to believe in the inerrancy. Now, make sure that you notice I did not say literal interpretation. I said the inerrancy, because, of course, we're talking about in the original languages, not in the translations.
Yeah. So what's easier? Unless Rod, do you have one ready, or do you want me to? Okay, I'm gonna let him to find one from the book, because we do want to go back and forth from. You ready? Go for it.
Yeah. I was going to ask him about some of the reasons that the evolution view has been accepted that have been proven to be wrong. I'm thinking in particular about Haeckel's embryo drawings.
No,
Oh boy,
that's terrible. Yes,
go
sir.
for it.
What you've got right here in the book
Hmm.
I knew about this because of my friend Marcus. He educated me on some of these things. And I saw a TED talk on YouTube where this evolution guy with a PhD was actually showing the Heckle embryos. He said he's a British guy. He says, how do we know evolution is true? Well, and then he shows these embryos. He says, well, you see the similarities in the embryos, yada,
Hmm.
yada. Oh, and I knew already before
You
I
knew it was
watched
wrong.
him that those were fraudulent, proven fraudulent, accepted as frauds by evolutionists.
Oh,
And
heck,
he's still using it. And many textbooks are still using. Could you talk
that
about that
that
a little bit?
every scientist worth his salt knew it was not true by 1915. Um, you're going to get me on Haeckel. You're going to get an earful.
Oh, please, because that burns me up.
Well, Haeckel is arguably the third most important evolutionist of the 1800s, behind Charles Darwin and Thomas Huxley. But he so believed in evolution, he was quite willing to make up all kinds of frauds, such as the Pithecanthropus alalis. And in the case of those embryo drawings, Haeckel was an interesting piece of work. He did earn a PhD. He did teach at Jena University in the 1800s. He was an evolutionist before Darwin in the sense that he believed in evolution as a concept. But after having read Darwin, he became militant. And he would make up any fraud necessary to promote evolution. And one of those was those embryo drawings. And of course, if you'll notice, I show the real pictures below that. So you see the drawings and then the real pictures. But the concept that he had was called embryonic recapitulation, or ontogeny begets phylogeny. Somebody may remember those terms. Most people won't. It was the idea that from conception to the time that you were born, you went through the evolutionary stages. You recapitulated the evolutionary stages through which you had evolved to be whatever you were. And so he shows these embryos as almost all identical to start with, differentiating over time. And so at conception, you became a jellyfish, but in your mother's womb, you became a fish, and then an amphibian, and then a reptile and a mammal, and you were only born human. And again, no scientist would accept that today. I mean, that is as bogus as a $3 bill. And everybody knew it, really. And Haeckel actually, though he did have a PhD, was actually a good artist. His paintings still sell for significant money, mostly because of his historical position. But he actually took the legitimate embryo drawings of a couple of legitimate embryologists at the time, and he erased some lines. He drew some lines in. He changed the size by as much as a factor of 10. And that's why the embryos look so much alike, is because they were altered. Charles Darwin actually did the same thing in some of his works. But Haeckel, nonetheless, is absolute fraud. But he used this to deceive people, mostly blue collar workers in Germany, that evolution was true. But there was never any truth to it whatsoever. Now, what you're looking at there are pictures, but notice the lower one. You'll see the drawings smaller on the right and on the left, but in between there are the pictures of the actual embryos at the time of development. I don't know if you can kind of zoom in on that or not, but those are the drawings and pictures in my book. So the ones you see, yeah, well, that's just the top row,
He's
the
talking about
top
this right
three,
here.
yeah, the top three are the pictures of what he actually put in his book, and the two below down there are actually the photographs of the embryos as they compare to the drawings. And as you can see, they are nothing alike.
Yeah.
The same thing with
Right.
Pithecanthropus alalis. He simply made that up. I mean, that was made up out of pure cloth. There's never been a piece of evidence anywhere discovered to support that one.
And yet that has still been in textbooks
It's
up
still
until
in
the
textbooks
21st century.
today.
I got
And
news
I
for
got
you. Only a few years ago, I found them in textbooks in Florida State University in Tallahassee. That was only about 10 years ago.
FSU.
Yep.
so Michael
And
was saying, yeah, but
yeah,
but
but
Dr.
what?
McMurtry
It's
is
not
also a
true.
guy with a PhD, but But here's the difference. Dr. McMurtry is not using fraudulent drawings to prove his points.
No, and I'm not going to. First of all, I'm not a good artist. But anyway, I'm not going to do it anyway. I'd be drawing stick figures. But we have to take a look. And again, remember what I said. A good scientist doesn't seek knowledge. A good scientist seeks truth. And when you find truth, you have to accept it, whether you like it or not. Or if you seek truth, find it, and don't accept it, then you're being intellectually dishonest.
Yeah. Einstein said that religion and science are both pursuing the same thing, truth. We're just coming from different perspectives. And Einstein was intellectually honest enough to admit that he used a fudge factor in his equation. And it was the biggest blunder of his career. I guess you know what I'm talking about, the cosmological constant.
Yes. Yeah. Einstein was not perfect. I mean, none of us are. So Einstein was never a Christian. He was raised basically a secular Jew. And thank God he escaped Germany, But he wasn't always right. But he did predict that gravity would bend light, for instance, and he was right about that. And much of what he did was absolutely groundbreaking. I mean, his first writings were incredible. General and
And
special relativity.
he rejected quantum mechanics at first, but then finally decided, okay, I guess I was wrong, and then he tried to understand it.
Well, if I may interject, I have a problem with the quantum physics, quantum mechanics. There's no doubt it's been a useful research tool, so don't get me wrong. I'm not throwing the baby out here with the bathwater. But on the other hand, it's on the verge of voodoo science, because think with me, Rod. In quantum mechanics, quantum physics, everything is a point source. They eliminate mass. But is that reality? So it's been a useful research tool. Don't get me wrong. But some of the assumptions of being a point without mass in the equations also isn't reality either. So it's a two-edged sword with it.
It does get pretty weird.
Yeah, especially when they start throwing in front of everything.
Entanglement and stuff like that.
Well, entanglement is a real stretch, but we can actually see the effects. So what we don't know is how it does it. Again, I want to stress there are things that we can see going on, but cannot explain. But what does that mean? It means there's somebody with a greater intellect than us that put it in place, and we just aren't smart enough to figure it out yet. That great statement about we were just thinking God's thoughts after him is exactly true. He does challenge us in the creation mandate in Genesis chapter 1 to do that. And we are to do it for the benefit of others, for mankind. But we're only thinking his thoughts after him. And by no means a stretch of imagination are we ever going to get to the point where we are equal. There's not a chance.
Oh, yeah, we'd mess everything up big time.
Actually, I thought you were going to ask the question of why does anybody want to believe in evolution?
Well, I can tell you why I believed in it.
Well, it's what you were taught, right?
Because I never studied it. Yeah, I never studied it. I was told it was settled science.
Well, of course, first of all, anybody says anything is settled science, you know that they're lying because their lips are moving. The concept of settled science is anti-science. I mean, if we accepted the concept of settled science, then we would still believe that rats spontaneously generated from a pile of rotting rags. It's because we don't accept it that we continue to do research and learn more. But settled science is anti-scientific. And so, again, the word consensus is not science. It's not data. Consensus is simply an opinion of a majority, but that doesn't make it true. If you had 100 people in a room and one knew the truth and the other 99 didn't, would you determine truth by voting?
Yeah,
So
that's
consensus is the worst kind of science. Consensus science
Mhm.
is what brings forth this idea of settled science. But both are the worst ideas that you could possibly have in the practice of science. And it stifles scientific effort. So I would reject both in a heartbeat. Okay. Um, and I'm sorry, I just wanted to get those points out there. Um, but the real reason
Oh,
people
I
want to
will
believe in evolution is
gladly
different.
acknowledge, I'll gladly admit that it was ignorance on my part to just accept the narrative that it's settled science. Once I actually started learning about nucleotides and DNA and genetic
Mhm.
programming, molecular machines, and all of these things, I just said, wait a minute, this is not the result of an unguided process, and this doesn't work for me. Once I understood it, but I never
But
bothered to
that's a good
study it
start.
because I didn't see any point.
Yeah, but today you can disprove evolution with one word, entropy. You can disprove it with two
Mm.
words, genetic entropy. We can disprove evolution and evolutionary time in hundreds of ways. And I would point out that God never intended the creation to last for a long time once it became imperfect. And so think about it. God created the entire universe perfect. It's not old, it's only 6,000 years old. He created in 6 real days, just like we experience today. And it not only says that in Genesis, but it says it in other places as well, in the Old Testament and in the New. For instance, Jesus said that Adam and Eve were there from at the beginning, not coming along millions of years later. So they are not the result of the evolution of primates. And there's tremendously good creation verses from Isaiah chapter 42 through chapter 45. And one of those verses is, He did not create the earth to be uninhabited. He created it to be inhabited immediately,
Mhm.
meaning by humans. If you doubt the 6 days, even though in Genesis chapter 1 it's very obvious it's 6 24-hour days as we experience today, but if you go to the book of the Exodus, chapter 20, verses 8 to 11, he says, You shall work 6 days and rest one because I did. Now, I will grant you, in my opinion, having studied this now and I would go all the way back to my evolutionary days, I have studied from both sides. I was an evolutionist, I taught it. I'm a creationist and Christian today. I've taught both sides. I'm a formidable enemy to the evolutionists. But, most Christians just cannot believe, initially at least, that God could have done all the things that he did in 6 24-hour days. They say, oh, and now day six, I agree. It requires sequential time on day 6. It's still only 24 hours, but there are events that are recorded on that day that are in a sequence. But on days 1 through 5, I would disagree. There are different ways of looking at it.
Mhm.
And so I think initially all, early Christians, whether they're old numerically or not, struggle with the idea that how could God have done all that? How could he have, made all the stars and planets in one day? And I admit I had the same struggle. Like I said, it took me 16 months to get from a old to a young view of things. But today, having actually studied that aspect for 50 years, I would ask, why did it take so long? Because in the first 5 days, he could have done everything in the first second and then
Yes.
waited 23 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds to do the next thing. But he did it on 6 days to give us a pattern to live our lives, that we concentrate on the natural for 6 days. But on day 7, and people don't understand the word Shabbat in Hebrew. Shabbat does not mean on the 7th day you sit on the sofa, become a couch potato. The word itself actually means that you work just as hard as the other 6 days, but you change your emphasis so that for 6 days you work primarily in the physical, but never forget the supernatural. And on the 7th day,
Mm.
you work just as hard on the supernatural, but never forgetting the natural. And so we're to work hard on all 7. It's just a difference in emphasis. But he gives us that template of how we're to live our lives. And that's why he did it over those days instead of just boom, because he could have done it all. You just understand how powerful the infinite God is.
Yeah.
And it's hard for any of us to wrap our minds around it because we have finite minds. And we will never understand it. The finite mind cannot understand the infinite. And his thoughts are higher than our thoughts, as the stars about the same sort. But we can study, we can learn, we can help others with the research, and we can help to us to appreciate the whole creation, as you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I've never understood the hubris of the scientific evolutionist, Darwinist, materialist that they admit they know so little, yet they are hell bent. I'm watching something in Answers in Genesis they were just showing quote after quote after quote after quote of the scientists of the last 150 years, starting with, I think it was Hutton. Who was? Well, I think it was Hutton.
Well,
He
Hutton
was the one
published
that
in
was.
1795.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But basically, it was like we have to exclude God and the supernatural. That was the goal. And I actually wanted to put this question up because one of my regular viewers is actually in geology class right now, and it's stretching their faith. And I said, "Oh boy, when you were going in on Haeckel, I was like, well, wait till you hear about the father of geology." And I wanted you to just share on
Well,
that a little bit.
no,
Well,
I would not call him
geology.
well, yeah, I wouldn't call him the father, but he was the man who caused billions to believe in an old infinite time
Scottish
frame.
lawyer. What was it Vance?
No, no,
What was his
no,
last?
no, 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 no. You're confusing a couple of people here. Okay.
Okay, gotcha.
There were 6 French atheists in the 1700s, which is why France had the French Revolution. And their philosophy jumped across the North Sea to Scotland. And James Hutton, who did earn an MD, but never practiced medicine,
Hmm.
was the guy who wrote 2 volumes, Theory of the Earth, 1795, and that the Earth had no vestige of beginning, no vestige of an end. That kind of terminology. That he's the one who tried to convince people of infinite time.
Hmm.
So he took away a young Earth view from the society. Now, by the way, his writings are incredibly difficult to read, very obscure, but he was a gentleman farmer. He got an MD, never practiced. And then Sir Charles Lyell comes along. Now, he was Scottish and he was a lawyer. And yet the books he wrote started to be published in 1830. They are the foundation of modern geology, even today, even though they were written in 1830, 31, 32. He published 3 basic volumes of his works. But he's the one who sold people on the concept of uniformitarianism. Yeah. That's Charles Lyell, or Sir Charles Lyell, to be correct. But he published in 3 volumes. These are the ones that influenced Charles Darwin highly.
Yes.
But he's the one who sold the idea of uniformitarianism. Now, he did not invent the term. The term was actually invented by somebody else, but he's the one who sold the idea of uniformitarianism to the public, which is that the quick way was that the present is the key to the past. That whatever's happening today has happened exactly the same way for billions of years, And so he's the one that took away a fast creation and put in the public mind a slow, gradual process that everything took millions and bazillions of years to occur. And then, of course, Darwin comes along in 1859 and publishes his book in the fall. People only remember a partial of the title, briefly Origins or Origin of the Species or whatever. The book title is much longer.
Oh yes, very very racist.
It's very racist. Charles Darwin, Thomas Huxley, they were flaming racists. And of course, it is the teaching of evolution that teaches of racism in our public schools. If you want to get rid of racism in our society, just stop teaching evolution. The Bible teaches that we were all created equal, that we all came from two people that had enough genetic information for all the differences we see today. That's easily proven genetically. I have a video on there's absolutely no truth whatsoever to the races. There is no such thing as different races. Yeah, it's it's the origin of species by means of natural selection. But look at the subtitle, or
Yeah.
the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. That evolution is struggle. Actually, evolution is a religion of death.
Yes.
And so the whole title is very revealing. And again, these guys were flaming racists. And I would also point out that Charles Darwin was a flaming chauvinist pig too. He believed that women were at least 4 stages behind us men in our evolution. They were fine for making babies, and they had dexterity that made their handwork for sewing purposes better than men. But that they were not. But I'm serious. Just read his writings.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, Rod's got my book. I have a quote in there. Actually, a couple of quotes about what he thought about, of course, people of different colors. The book was really to justify the racism of England at the time of Victoria, having the authority to rule over countries around the world, people of various skin shades. But I am emphatic, absolute, will not give an inch. There is no such thing as different human races.
No, we're one race.
Every person on Earth, I don't care how black or white you are, except for albinos, which is a genetic condition. But all people on Earth are the same color. The only question is how much of it do you have? Now, I happen to be highly melanin deficient. That's my problem. But everybody is the same color. It's just how much of it do you have? And so there's no such thing. What we have are ethnicities.
Yes.
And the ethnicities are explained by the Tower of Babel experience, when one uniform, basically, population, very homogeneous population, was separated into 70 groups by language barriers. And from there, how we get different colors and heights and shapes and ears and noses is all easily explained genetically.
Rod, you got next one?
Yeah. This is totally unrelated to anything we've discussed up until now.
Oh, it's all related. It's
But
in his
on
book.
page
You
114.
think you got a coffee cup? Anyway.
Florida Germanic Stein right there.
Yes, sir.
He's got a quote in the book from Democratic Senator Tim Worth from Colorado.
Oh,
He
that's the
says,
section on no truth
he's
to
talking
global
about
warming.
global warming.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Right. He
I
says,
know that one.
even if the theory is wrong, we will be doing the right thing in terms of economic policy and the environmental policy. So he's saying, even if global warming isn't true, we'll be doing the right thing by promoting
it's religion,
environmental extremism.
It's ideology. It is not science. And if I may, Gabriel, this week we have received the final production of my new video on no truth to global warming, which is really no truth to global warming, global cooling, climate change being caused by human beings. I have a large section in the book in one of the later chapters, but we now have just received the video, and it's going to be put on the website for sale, as both physical, as well as an electronic download version of it. But we're putting that on the website this weekend, and next week we'll start taking orders for it.
Fantastic.
But I've been teaching on this for nearly 40 years. It's one of my pet projects, you might say. One of my pet hobbies is the disproof that humans have anything to do with global warming or global cooling. We have had 3 measurably, scientifically proven warm periods on Earth that are much warmer than today, and all before the Industrial Revolution, and all when the population was much smaller on Earth than it is today. And humans have absolutely nothing to do with it. These are all natural cycles. The warming and cooling we do see these cycles is actually, for the most part, due to sunspot activity and volcanic activity, because volcanoes always cool the Earth, regardless of how much material is produced, because the aerosols and particles going into the atmosphere block out some degree of sunlight, whether it's a whole lot or a little, but that always cools the Earth, period. And I would cite things like the eruption of Tambora, or we could go much earlier, towards our time. 1991, Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines cooled the Earth 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit in 1 year. So volcanoes always cool. And then it's a question of when the volcano erupts, what else is going on at the time in terms of sunspot activity? And those are the two biggest things that control what environmentalists would call, or people who study these things, drivers of what is occurring. And of course, what happens is some are going up and happen at the same time and reinforce each other, but others are, one's going up, one's going down, they kind of offset each other. And then sometimes you'll find some that are both negative and they kind of double up on the going down. But these are all natural things. We can't begin to control them. And I would point out, from a biblical standpoint, there's about 36 scriptures, Genesis 8:22, and in Amos, for instance, they show that God's in charge of the weather. He uses it to bless, he uses it to chastise, and we can't change it.
Did you want to add on to that, Rod?
One of the advantages, I was going to say, one of the advantages in being older is that you remember stuff that a lot of people don't remember. I was around back in the 70s when we had a couple of really brutal winters. And I remember one night I was listening to Larry King. He had a nationwide radio show back in the 70s. And there was this terrible blizzard up in Buffalo. And people who were gathered for a high school basketball game got snowed in and they couldn't get out. And temperatures were plummeting and just record snowfall and everything. And that happened a couple of years in a row. We had some brutal winters. And people turned to the scientific community and they said, what does this mean? And the scientific community said, well, we're entering into a new ice age.
That's
And they
right.
were really concerned about global cooling.
Yep.
And you tell that to people today and they think you're making it up, but it's true. I remember when global cooling was the panic. And it
Now,
was just,
if you'll,
just a couple of data points.
that quote from Tim Worth that you had out of my book, if you'll just go another couple pages, you're going to find quotations that I have from various publications in the mid to late 70s about how we were all going into the next ice age and we were all going to die. I mean, they said it. We're going to die.
Yep.
Well, that was the late 70s. And then what happened? Well, by 1980, they found out that actually we were starting into a period of global warming. And so they went from we're all going to die from global cooling to we're all going to die from global warming. But the whole thing was we're going to die, and that only government can solve problems, that humans are not to try it individually, in contradiction to what the Bible says. And it's a way of forming communism, socialism on the society. And in there, I also have quotes that back in 1912, in April 1912, when the Titanic sank, the iceberg it hit was a sign that we were going into the next ice age, because it was in 1895 that we came out of the Little Ice Age. And most people don't know anything about these things. I mean, the Little Ice Age lasted from approximately 1300 in that area to 1895. And if you think about your American history for a moment, remember that when George Washington took the Continental Army into winter headquarters at Valley Forge, it was a brutal winter.
Mm-hmm.
And that then when he attacked the Hessians over in Trenton, New Jersey, and had to cross the Delaware, there were icebergs in the river. Now, when was the last time there were icebergs in the Delaware? Back between 1800 and 1830, we had two very, very low sunspot activity periods. And that is when there were frost fairs, as they were called. The Thames froze over at London, and they put out kiosks on the ice on hot crust buns to the skaters. Well, that was 1800 to 1830, right after the Revolutionary War period. We have the Maunder minimum. We have the Dalton minimum, going back to the times when Galileo first discovered sunspots. And so we have a lot of material to prove the Earth has been much hotter and much colder than it is today, but humans had nothing to do with it.
Mm.
Just if I could add a little bit,
Go for it, brother.
because taken I'd taken violin lessons, and I got to studying the violin for a while, and they never were able to figure out why a Stradivarius and Guarnerius violin, why do they sound so much better than other violins? And they always looked at the way that they were manufactured. And then finally somebody decided, why don't we just think about the wood? The wood was from the Little Ice Age, and they think that the wood was affected by the temperatures,
Well, the trees were
and
growing
it,
at a
it
slower rate.
improved the quality of the sound.
hmm the annual rings were shorter because it was cooler weather. And also we have the dark ages. Now it's plural because there were two. It isn't a series of ages. It was just two, but that's why it's plural, dark ages. So as you go back in time, we have the Little Ice Age, which was brutal. Then we have what's called the medieval warm period. That's roughly 850 to 1250, 1300 time frame. Much warmer than today. Much warmer than today. And the Vikings from Denmark were able to settle Greenland and call it green because it was green. They continued on into North America and came as far as Oklahoma for various reasons, doing with good weather. But we have two dark ages before that, and then you get back to the Roman War period, and then you have fluctuations, but not serious fluctuations, going back to what evolutionists want to call the Minoan warm period. But you and I, as Christian believers, we would call it the Moses Joshua warm period. So, remember when God was present with them in the desert for 40 years, and he was a pillar of fire at night, but he was a cloud at day, and that's so that they could march in the shade.
Mm.
Because that was a particularly warm period on Earth at that time. So, and it was the Roman warm period. God the Father wanted to make sure that Jesus was born at a nice warm time. But the Dark Ages were dark not because people were losing their minds, not because they lost the intellectual findings of the earlier time frames of the ancients as we go back. They were the Dark Ages because it was dark, it was cold, it was miserable. There was pestilence and famine and so forth because it was so much colder, and it started to get better, and then it went down again. And that's why there's two big dips called the Dark Ages. But technological advances, intellectual advances, were actually continuing quite nicely.
Mm-hmm.
It was just that the earth was cold, and there was less food, and there was pestilence and war and all that sort of thing. And I personally like it cold. I'm Scottish by background, Scandinavian blood, and God has a sense of humor. I live in Florida.
I was gonna say, what are you doing in Florida?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Ask him, not me. But the truth of the matter is, humanity is better off when we have warm periods because we can grow crops further north and further south, and we have a growing population. And everything that environmental terrorists do is exactly 180 degrees the wrong thing. We ought to be releasing the carbon dioxide. The plants would just absorb it. We need food. By sequestering carbon dioxide, we are actually, and I'm serious, I'm not joking about it, we are literally starving people to death in certain parts of the world because of the sequestration of carbon dioxide, lowering our carbon footprint, etc. Now, I do not believe in haste, and I don't believe in waste. I believe in being a good steward as God wants us to be. But I would stipulate we should be burning coal, oil, natural gas as fast as we could, provided it was for a useful purpose, not just to waste it, but for a useful purpose. Because again, the plants would just absorb it. Carbon dioxide is not a greenhouse gas. We need it. It's what helps keep us from freezing to death. Anyway, I have a long chapter, and we just came out. I have a long chapter in my book, which Rod has an older copy of, but I have added to that material in the newer version. but I
Yeah,
also
I
have
couldn't
just got
find
this
those
video.
other quotes. Sorry.
Oh, well, you would. I could get it out if you want to, and I can show you where it is. But things like from Newsweek and other, whatever magazines that were trusted in those days, and today mostly don't exist.
Yeah.
Um, but again, we came out of the Little Ice Age in 1895, and by 1912, they're talking about us going into the next, backing down into the next ice age. And the same thing then, they found out, oh no, actually we were still in a warming from the 1895 into the Little Ice Age, and so it was global warming. And then they came along, because of the Dust Bowl in those times. But do you know that during the Dust Bowl, the temperature on Earth was actually going down because the dust was blocking out sunlight?
Mm.
It was dry, but that was an extended period of El Ninos, and that was the problem that we had at the time. And then, of course, we have not had accurate information on hurricane activity until 1850. So starting in 1850, we started keeping serious records on hurricanes. And of course, I live in Florida. It's kind of important to us down here. And of course, the people who all talk about global warming say, well, because of global warming, we're going to have more and more hurricanes, and they're going to be stronger and stronger. And if you follow their logic, you can understand it, because, of course, it is the evaporation of hot water that drives the strength of hurricanes, etc. So that seems reasonable, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But if you take a look at it in 10-year increments, in decades, do you know when the strongest period of hurricanes that we can document occurred? 1940 to 1950. Why don't you read about that in the history textbooks? Could it be the space was taken up because of something called World War II? And people weren't really concerned about, hurricanes hitting Florida when we were fighting a war around the world? But the truth of the matter
They
is,
were
since
more
the
concerned about atomic bombs.
well, that too, but of course they were concerned about it, as we should be, with atomic bombs, because of nuclear winter. But the fact of the matter is, the Earth is continuously cooling. I don't care what else goes on. I don't care whether it's a hotter or colder year in the atmosphere. The Earth is continuously cooling. It's a big hot rock. It loses more heat every day than it gets from the sun. God knew we would need it. That's why he put it there, because we would not exist if it were just because of the heat coming from the sun. So we have to have heat coming out of the Earth, as well as the heating from the sun, to keep us alive. But the Earth is constantly losing heat. Well, the oceans are constantly losing heat. So the oceans are constantly getting cooler. Not a lot, but they are getting cooler. And that is why hurricane activity is slightly going down over time, because there's just not the heat there to generate hypercanes, as they would have been called way back. And so this is one reason why hurricane activity has actually been going down the last 50, 60 years.
I actually got into an argument about that 3 or 4 years ago on of course, on the internet with a guy, and I grew up in Florida, so and did some
My
light
condolences.
historical reading on. Yeah, right. Yeah, no, trust me. There's no arguing with some people. Well, there's no arguing with ignorance, because all the guy wants to throw at me was just what CNN was saying, and I'm like, bro, have you actually read what we've been tracking, what the history says? And of course not, and that doesn't matter because they just want to be
Yes,
right.
have you ever looked at the truth instead of just being convinced by people with an opinion or an agenda or an ideology? Because that's all it is. This is a religion. It isn't the truth. It's not what's really happening. But you'll notice that actually, since the Little Ice Age ended, like I said, 1895, according to these evolutionary ideologues, environmental terrorists, we have had global warming, global cooling, global warming, global cooling, global warming. And they change their opinion about 25 to 35 years regularly.
That's why they finally go with climate change, because it just covers everything. It's changing.
Well, wait a minute. When they say, well, we're going to prevent climate change, remember that?
Oh yeah.
There's the global warming, there's the global cooling, but we're going to prevent climate change. Now, that would be the worst thing we could possibly do. First of all, if you're going to prevent climate change, so which climate are you going to end up with?
Yeah.
I personally do not want to live in the Sahara.
Yeah.
So So if we're going to prevent climate change, which climate are we going to settle on?
It's called tax dollars.
Yes,
That's what it is. Just give us your tax
well,
dollars.
they promote it for two reasons. One, it's ideological, and they're trying to promote socialism and communism. That only
Yes.
government can solve the problems. But the
Yes.
second thing with that is not only the implementation of that, but of course it is control. It's just plain out control.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an ideology, and it allows them to be puffed up, if you'll excuse the expression, that somehow or another we are capable of doing these things. Well, humans are not capable of doing these things. We don't begin to have the power. If you look at how much power God has put into nature, yeah, as you know, I realize about Mount St. Helens, 1980. But we'll do a presentation on Mount St. Helens, and it's a relatively small volcano in the southwest corner of Washington State. And there were 7 eruptions starting on Sunday morning, May the 18th, 1980, and going on through March 19th, 1982. Well, that one volcano, the first major eruption on May the 18th, the explosion has been calculated at a 24 megaton atomic bomb. And it's a little volcano.
Yeah.
I mean, and when you compare that, now listen to this one, when you compare that to Krakatoa, in the 1880s, Krakatoa goes off. It's the sound heard around the world. Big deal, real big deal. And the sound was heard in downtown London, England. That was 18 times bigger than Mount St. Helens. But that's nothing. Wait a minute, that's nothing compared to Tambora. When you take a look at the eruption of Tambora, 1815, it was 80 times bigger than Mount St. Helens.
Wow.
And the following year, in 1816, you had the year without summer. That's why I said volcanoes always cool the earth. And after that one volcano in Indonesia, and of course there were other volcanoes that year. There's always more than one active volcano every year. But 1 year later, it snowed in every month of the year in Europe. It was the year without summer. Just to show you how volcanoes affect weather and volcanoes affect history. I could give you lots of really good examples on how volcanoes have affected history.
I've never heard you go into this much depth of it. It's funny because I always bring this up when discussing climate change and talking about how much carbon dioxide they throw up into the atmosphere. And there's incredible video somebody actually captured of, I can't remember where it was. It was somewhere in Southeast Asia where they actually captured a volcano going off on film.
Oh,
and
there's a tremendous picture of Pinatubo in the Philippines.
Was that the one where the shockwave hits them at a good 20 seconds after it erupts and blows every cloud out of the sky? Is that one that you're talking about?
I'm not sure because we'd have to get together and make sure we got the right thing. But when you see Mount Pinatubo erupt in the Philippines, that's 1991. It looks like a champagne cork blown off of a bottle that's been heated and shaken up real good. It is phenomenal. And yet that's not nearly as big as some of the volcanoes I was just talking about. Krakatoa and Tambora were much bigger. And we know of much bigger eruptions than that. The Yosemite super crater, the Crater Lake in Washington. We know of volcanoes that were much bigger than Tambora.
That's incredible. There was one question I did want to finish off because we got on a little bit of a rabbit trail. We were talking about Mr. Lawyer Lyle. We kind of breezed over his book because I wanted to hit this for Saint Questions because she had a question about what is actually in the inside of the earth, but I wanted you to kind of just finish off if you could on how he wrote his book based on nothing. He just literally wrote the layer. He invented layers. Just if you expound on that. And
be careful about that because there are layers and they knew that. And people have for thousands of years understood that fossils were the remnant of creatures that had lived in the past, but they didn't really get into paleontology until the early 1800s. But Strata Smith, who was working with the railroads in the UK, and when they put in cuts to put in railroads, he was looking at the strata and that's where this
Mhm.
nickname comes from. And so he mapped the strata in a lot of the UK, gets a lot of credit for the research on that.
Yeah.
But I would remind you that Charles Lyell was a lawyer. He was not a
Yeah.
scientist. He was never a geologist. But being a lawyer, he knew how to make a case and argue people into believing his version of the evidence. Now, I would tell you that as a lawyer, I could argue the same thing from the strata, but being laid down all in 1 year.
Yeah.
The strata are simply the strata,
Yes.
but there are many inconsistencies in the strata with the idea of slow and gradual. But he took the layers, used his lawyer expertise to build a case that this was slow and gradual, influenced Charles Darwin so that when he was on the Beagle and went down to South America and looked at the mouth at the Santa Cruz, he was persuaded that, oh, this must have been slow and gradual
Mhm.
because he was reading Lyell's book. But Lyell was a lawyer. He was not a scientist. He simply took the evidence, and as any good lawyer would do, he spun his case.
Yeah.
But I can take the same evidence as a lawyer for the other side and make a very good case that this is a 1 year worldwide flood. So Lyell, Hutton, Lyell, and so on, they were talking about what is referred to as historical geology, meaning millions and billions of years.
Yeah.
But the layers themselves are actually much better understood as flood geology, meaning a
Yes.
1 year long flood, as the Bible records as Noah's flood. And so
Mhm.
it's the same evidence.
Yeah.
It's simply how do we take a look at it? What's my interpretation? Because my interpretation is different than his interpretation.
Yeah.
And so I allow the jury to take a look at the evidence, listen to the arguments from both sides. And I'm not afraid of that because if you hear the truth, um, take a look at the evidence for yourself, you will realize that what we see in the ground is totally consistent with flood geology and not
Mhm.
with historical geology.
Yes, and I encourage everybody watching, if you've never seen Dr. Grady's videos on this topic, he goes into depths on the how coal is formed, especially the anthracite coal, which is the
Yep.
10-1. I mean, it's incredible, and of course the fossils that run through multiple layers, which are supposed to be ages. It just blows
Polystrate
the
fossils, often upside down, no
yep.
tops, no bottoms.
So and So what is it that you believe is actually on the inside? Do you follow? And I guess she's
Oh,
particularly taking a geologic class right now in college. So
I'm not quite sure. Really, I want to be careful about the question. As far as what scientifically we know that's there is that the Earth gets hotter at about 90 degrees Fahrenheit per mile as you go down. It's really hot. The center is about 13,000 degrees. That's 3,000 degrees above the surface of the sun. We're sitting on top of a big hot rock. Now, there are zones of material. What we have is the hard surface like we're walking on. But you go down far enough, you get into the magma liquid rock. There's also water down there too, going down miles. But then you get into the purely liquid rock. However, recent research has shown that the Earth actually has a solid core at the center. And that's because the pressure gets to a certain point where the liquid is forced to go back into a solid state, even though it's as hot as it is and shouldn't be. And that solid core at the center rotates at a slightly different speed than the rest of the Earth, which is not surprising because since it is surrounded by liquid material and then the hard surface, there would be a lag in the rotation. And that's
yeah,
exactly what we find. Um, so I'm answering that in a physical way because I have a funny feeling she might also be wondering about the spiritual aspect of it too, but supernatural. But yes, there's these different zones. Now remember, we have never dug a hole deeper than 7 miles. I've been there. The Russians did that, gave up when they got to
yeah. How,
seven
how
miles.
deep did it go before they gave up? I can't remember.
Seven, 7 miles. It's up in the Kola Peninsula. I've been there. It's where Norway and Sweden, Finland, and Russia all kind of come to a point up there at the very north end. I've in my mission work, I went to Russia 59 times and got out 2 days before the invasion of Ukraine. But that's where they decided to drill it. But you have to remember, doesn't matter whether you're in the Arctic Circle, which it is, but it doesn't matter because you're still going to pick up about 90 degrees Fahrenheit per mile as you go down. And so you go down 7 miles times 90 degrees. Okay, so you're talking about temperatures in the 600s. Now, the problem then is, first of all, have you ever tried to turn a straw that's 7 miles long? Number two, when you get down into those temperatures, metals and lubricants become a big problem.
Mhm.
So once they got down 7 miles, they had to just give it up and abandon it. But the stuff's still there, but just abandoned. And no, they didn't hear screams coming out of it either.
Thank
Oh
you.
yeah, I think I've seen about 50 videos on that. And
Bogus.
there you go. That's the viral clip right there, y'all. Dr. Grady overturns the Russians hearing hell when they drilled into the center of the earth.
Never happened. They drilled the hole though, and like I said, I've ministered up there 4 times.
Rod, did you have another one before we go to the chat for some questions?
No, let's take some questions.
We got through all that. Okay, so Robert Van has been hitting us with some hypothesis and some A/B logic stuff, and he threw it up there when we were in the middle of conversation. I think I was still fighting off Brother Brailsford, and I think Brother Brailsford just I think he just got tired. But I do want to actually go back up to one of his questions because I said I would, even though I don't think he's here. And if he is here, brother, thank you for toughing it out. So this is Robert Van's question. Ask him if he understands how to plug data into A is B for false scientific hypothesis logic. Science 101, please.
Well, I think the question is kind of irrelevant, actually. Questions that would be asked in that way, whether I understand a particular thing is simply doubting my background. What do you really want to know?
Yeah, and I think this is what he was talking about. And that's it's more of a statement than a question. I was trying to get him to nail down like, what are you trying? And this is what when he said this, I was like, okay, that makes sense. What came first? Finite or infinite? Infinite can't increase, but finite can increase to infinite. So I guess he was using this as a proof for the existence of God. I think is what
Well,
his.
I mean, the basic argument is correct because the infinite had to come first. However,
Yeah.
when somebody asks you a question, is it this or that? Let me teach you a great truth. Stop and don't answer the question. And think, is it actually this or that? Or is it a third answer they didn't give you? Because when people ask you a question, is it this or that? They're trying to get you to give them the answer they want.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to illustrate is a great truth. When somebody says, is it this or that? Don't answer immediately. Stop and consider, is it actually this or that? Or is it a third option they didn't even mention? Because, for instance, what is the correct answer to which came first, the chicken or the egg? The correct answer is neither.
Mm-hmm.
When God created the chicken, the egg was inside, and they were created at the same time. And so, again, in the case of infinite versus finite, I would agree. The infinite came first. But the finite, as we are, cannot understand the infinite. We can struggle, we can learn, we can achieve, etc., but we cannot come anywhere near close. And that's what God tells us in the Bible. And that's an absolute scientific truth.
All right, so here's apparently there was a lot of chat, so I couldn't take it all the way back to the beginning. I think the first one that he quoted was why the Catholic Church, and I don't know, I'm not Catholic. I believe his father is the gentleman that I'm actually acquainted with and have been Facebook friends with for about a decade. I guess I don't know if the Catholic Church on the whole has ratified theistic evolution, but I guess that was the first point that he made, which to me would kind of make sense why he eventually has now walked away from his faith because he said now an atheist. I don't know
Well,
what the deal is.
technically, there is no such thing as a true atheist. He just uses the word probably without even knowing what he's talking about. However, let's talk about the Catholic Church for just a moment. The traditional position of the church was creation. However, because of evolutionists becoming very strong about their positions and claiming that creation was religion, but evolution was science, which is not true. But because of that claim, eventually Pius in 1953 opened the door to theistic evolution being acceptable doctrine in the Roman Church. Then I came back from a mission trip to Russia, and I think it was in 96, and John Paul II had opened that door further. And today, the general position, now there are still Catholics who believe in a 6,000-year-old creation. So again,
Orthodox.
but the Catholic Church has a broad spectrum of individual beliefs. I'm just,
Yes.
But the general position in parochial schools today, for instance, they teach that God used the evolution process to evolve a smart ape. And when the ape got smart enough, he put the spirit of Adam into that ape, and that was the first man. And so they teach a particular version of theistic evolution today as accepted doctrine in the Roman Church. But not all Roman Catholics believe it. But that's the general position, and I would say basically the majority position. Again, consensus. Again, majority doesn't make you right.
Yeah.
And so it is a very unfortunate position. And I'm sorry the Catholic Church did that. But then again, there are many Protestant denominations that have gone so far left, they're much worse. If you there's Protestant denominational portions that have gone so far left, they're not Christians anymore.
Yes.
Period. And so, we're not looking at the Catholic Church and pointing fingers here. It's equally true of the Protestants and Orthodox as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. If I can just insert a historical moment. When I first started going to Russia, my first trip was in July of '94. The Patriarch Alexei was a staunch creationist. As a matter of fact, I even helped to publish books on creation in the Russian language that he endorsed.
Really?
And that's pretty strange for the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church to endorse writings by Protestants, let me tell you. But the problem is, when he died, Putin made sure that the next Patriarch was going to toe the line with the Russian communist view that he wanted. And so after Alexei died, the Russian Orthodox Church, because the new Patriarch, has gone to theistic evolution, and that's a shame.
I didn't know that, and that is a shame. That is a shame. That might take me into Michael's next question. Like I said, he was fire hosing. He said, very legitimate scholars believe that Genesis was not intended to be literal. And I told him, I was like, liberal scholars, and that's a loaded statement, because I could give you but many legitimate scholars that would say hogwash. Was it intended to be literal? I mean, as far as I understood, Talmudically and up until I don't know how many hundreds of years ago, even from a Jewish perspective, it was absolutely to be viewed as history, not as poetry.
Thank you. And let me start off. Let's not use the word literal. Okay?
Yes.
Because it's inerrant. You don't read it literally, you read it as inerrant. Secondly, there's absolutely no question, and you, Gabriel, use the word we need to stress. It's real history. Genesis in the first chapters is written in what is called, I'll preface this for just a second. Every language has sublanguages. You don't write a business report the same way you write poetry, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, the first chapter of Genesis and following are written in what is called, I want to use the right terms here. It's to be taken as history, as written. It's Hebrew narrative, which means it's real history. It's not poetry. It's not allegorical. And if you have ever read a technical paper, I don't care whether it's economics or science or medicine or whatever, what do you see in a technical article? You see a title, you see an abstract, and you see the body of the article, correct? And that's exactly the way God wrote the Bible. The title is Bible. Then the abstract is Genesis 1:1 down to the first half of Genesis 2:4. And that's the abstract. That's the skeletal outline. And then God gives us the article in which he's now filling in the details. It's not two creations, it's the same creation. It's just the skeletal outline, the abstract, and then the details come along right behind it. But it's written in what's called continuous Hebrew narrative. That language is absolutely historical, without any invention, poetry, etc. So, continuous Hebrew narrative, real history.
Yeah.
But again, it's written as a skeletal outline first, and then details that fill in following.
Yeah. And I mean, and Yeshua, Jesus referred to it that way, and the prophets before him and the apostles after him.
There's only 5 books in the New Testament that do not specifically consider Genesis as real history. It's simply not mentioned in 5 of the books. But every other book in the New Testament does. And Jesus certainly considered it as real history.
Especially creation, the garden, and Noah, which has become, unfortunately, in the modern church, debated. Which I think this is where he was trying to get to, and this is why I'm so passionate to study this as a musician, not a scientist, but a lover of science my entire life. Why is this so important concerning our faith? And my juxtaposition, or my view is, if you chop out those first six chapters, it will quickly erode your faith. If you say, oh, that's all just it's all legend, it's all a myth. I have watched people do this, from Michael Gungor to friends that I went to Bible college with. Go
Once
ahead.
you compromise the Bible with anything, it will lead down the yellow brick road and simply take you farther and farther away to the point where you'll stop believing altogether. So it's the fact that you're compromising to start with that leads to further compromises and destroys faith. Now, again, I want to point out, when you look at all the other religions of the world, Christianity is the only rational, reasonable, logical, and evidence-based faith. You cannot say that about any other religion in the world, which is why I accepted it. Because if I could not prove that it was exactly as I just said, I would have gone on to the next one to see what I could find. But there can only be one true religion. We're not all, the Pope at the moment, that we're all going, studying, trying to get to the same place as everyone. No, that's not true at all.
No, and many of his cardinals and bishops disagree with him. I mean, they're getting to the point of
Well, they're hoping he leaves real soon.
That's the polite way of saying that we wish he would go to the grave quick.
Benedict was much better. But the fact of the matter is, this is a guy who's into the social gospel. He's into black liberation theology kind of things. And I don't want to attack him further. I mean, I'm just describing what he is. But I hope that the next Pope is someone who really accepts the Bible. But the real problem here is, if you deny one part of the Bible, then you're going to deny other parts. The biggest problem we have right now with people who are Christians, now I'm not talking about the non-Christians, but the biggest problem we have with people that are Christians, number one, is apathy. That's the biggest problem. The second biggest problem, though, is the one who is willing to accept Jesus Christ as Savior. And I got an e-ticket ride to heaven. But the problem is they do not accept Jesus as Lord. Now, how are we to worship God biblically? Well, that's in spirit and in truth, correct?
Yes, sir.
So it's a 50-50 process. 50% in the supernatural, 50% in the intellect. And so we're to have both at 50-50. Again, spirit, it's supernatural, and 50% intellect. That's truth. And so, again, people who are willing to compromise and say that I'll accept that Jesus died on the cross for my sins and I accept his blood to cover my sins and so forth, but I'm not willing to accept him as Lord, have a serious, serious problem. And it's the same thing that causes them then to pick and choose and say, well, I'm willing to believe this part of the Bible, but not that part of the Bible. And when you make compromises, it leads to more and more compromises. And
Yeah.
Martin Luther even wrote about this. I quote Luther in one of my presentations on why the gap theory isn't true, if you want to know. But nonetheless, there are those that are willing to compromise. Once you compromise, you will continue to compromise yourself right out of faith.
That's it.
Now,
That's
I would
that's
tell
it
you,
right there.
it's the first 11 chapters, not the first 6. It's the first 11 chapters of Genesis. That's the foundation.
Yes.
And think about, how do you build a house? Well, you build the roof first, right?
Yeah, no, you put
Right.
you put the windows on first. You put the walls that aren't there.
No, Gabriel, you're not thinking logically here. Isn't that where the expression to raise the roof came from?
Yeah.
So you build the roof first, then you put the walls in underneath it. You lift the roof,
Yeah.
and then you slide the foundation in underneath, right?
Of course. Yeah, you pick the whole thing up and just slide in that sinking
Yeah.
sand.
Well, God wrote the Bible the same way you built a house. The first 11 chapters are foundation. The rest of it's sticks and bricks. The rest of it's walls and wiring. But it's the first 11 chapters that are the foundation. And there's not one significant Christian doctrine that doesn't start in the first 11 chapters of Genesis. And I would defy anybody to name one. We could literally sit here and name dozens and dozens of essential Christian doctrines, but they all have their root in the first 11 chapters of Genesis.
Yep. Soteriology being the one that sticks out to me immediately.
Well, again, every one of them. But you pick and choose the one that appeals to you first. But that's fine. I'm not going to argue on that.
We've kept you here 2 hours. There's apparently they got
to cut off.
Yeah. So we'll hopefully we'll just have to have you back, and I apologize to those that didn't get their questions in. Hopefully you have enjoyed this. Make sure you go back and watch it. If you didn't catch the whole thing, go to Dr. Grady's website, creationworldview.org. And I would encourage you to go and to donate, because ministry doesn't happen on hopes and wishes. It happens on prayer and finances. So pray for Dr. Grady.
We do have a spot to donate. We have a monthly newsletter about our mission work and teaching on science. We don't use it begging for money, but we'd like you to send it if you could. But we have lots of free resources, free articles, over 400 short videos and so forth. They're all free. And then we have the bookstore too, and the donation, and the newsletter.
Yep.
So I appreciate you.
Rod, you want to have the final word?
I just want to say thank you for your time, and I wish that I had gotten back to you a little bit sooner, but sometimes the interviewing process gets to me, and I think that Gabriel is better at this than I am. So, but I do appreciate your patience and your willingness to come on here and put up with a little bit of noise coming from the chat box and so forth. I'm sure you're used to it.
Listen, Rod. I'm just glad that in some way we met, so to speak, back in the 90s. This has borne fruition tonight.
Yeah, I'm sure people will be.
Unfortunately, it took me this long. It was like 35 years.
Hey, things get better with age, right?
Fine wine. Dr. Grady, we will let you go. I'll go ahead and you can go ahead and sign off. I'll talk to the folks, because you've been sitting there for 2 hours, and I really appreciate it. And I will be sowing into your ministry this evening, and I encourage y'all as to do the same. I'm not asking anybody to do anything I am not going to do myself, because I have watched hours and hours and hours of Dr. Grady's teachings and lessons and things on YouTube. So he has blessed me incredibly, and I can say say thank you with my mouth, but it really means more when I show people, and I can't take them out for a meal because I don't live in Florida. But maybe next time I'm in Florida, I can take them out to a meal and bless his ministry.
Check with me and see if I'm here.
I will. I surely will. So, Dr. Grady, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you, be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you his shalom. May you be made whole in everywhere that you go. May he bless you and keep you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bless you for the night. Thank you, Rod. And we'll talk later.
All right, y'all.
All right, good night.
That's the show. Jesus loves you, and so do we. You take care. Peace out.